All who can, please rise to salute our new national queen, the people's princess, Miss AIMEE. And I would pay double taxes for her. Hey lovelies, welcome back to a new video, or welcome if you are new here. Now, I recently watched the final season of the beloved Netflix show, Sex Education. I would say I've been a casual fan of the show since it started in 2019. There have been parts of the show which I haven't enjoyed, haven't liked, and we'll get onto that later. But as a whole, I've quite enjoyed the show over the years, and I was really excited to see how they were going to wrap it up, because obviously there's so many characters that we love and there's so many different storylines, so I was very excited to see how they were going to wrap it up. I literally wrote up this whole script for this whole YouTube video, and then I put on my Instagram stories that I was going to do a video on it, and someone was like, oh great, because like I really hated it and I like want to know what you think. And I was like, what? I went to Twitter and I could see some people annoyed at certain parts of it. I couldn't see like a lot of hate for the show. I could see people annoyed at certain aspects of it, but I'd already scripted this whole video where I really liked it. So now this is an in defense of Sex Education, the climax. I'm here to defend it, okay? So that's what we're gonna do today, here and now. But before we get into that, obviously all the usual YouTube stuff. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if you like this video, and also subscribe and put the notification bells on if you want to see more of my content. Right, so obviously there are so many different characters and so many different storylines within Sex Education. So I really had so many different moving parts of this video and things that I wanted to talk about. So what I've done is I've split this video into chapters. So if there was only like one particular bit that you cared about and you wanted to know what I thought, or you wanted to like have the discussion on that, then you can go to the chapters that I've put in the description box. But if not, and you're here for the whole thing, I love you and appreciate you very much so. And I'm sorry if I've not covered something that you thought was really important or a character that you really liked, but these are just the things that really stood out to me and the things that I really wanted to talk about. So let's get into it. But now this isn't specific just to this season, but as someone who loves like fashion and style, I couldn't not address this when talking about Sex Education. The style and the fashion in this show feels so unique to Sex Education and yet so nostalgic as well. Like simultaneously, it feels very unique to the show, but it also feels like elements of something that I'm familiar with and that feels homely almost. The fashion in the show feels very current, and there's easily identifiable pieces within the costume. So for example, there's lots of Lucy and Yak, particularly the dungarees. I also spotted the Kurt Geiger boots on Ruby, but then it also feels heavily reminiscent of 70s and more, I would say 80s in this season in particular. And as someone who was a huge fan of the 70s and 80s, it just scratches my brain in like such a satisfying part of my brain. And I would say the looks are great across the whole cast, but two of my favourite looks that are consistently worn on two different characters are AIMEE and Ruby, of course my queens. But it's not just the fashion where this ambiguous style comes in, it's also across the set design and the whole world building of the town of Mordau. Like at points the show literally looks like it's set out of like Stranger Things or something like that, and then like I forget what I'm watching and someone will talk and I'm like, oh, this is like meant to be the UK. So obviously it's filmed across the UK, particularly parts of Wales and then like the English-Wales border. And I think in this season in particular, there seems to be more world building. Maybe I just don't remember it as much in the other seasons, but I feel like in this season we got to see some more locations. Like the town, the shopping mall, the funeral home. It just expanded that world by adding a few more locations, and what I was really impressed by is the aesthetic was consistent across all of it. Now the ambiguity around the aesthetic of Sex Education is not ambiguous. Writer Laurie Nunn says it was a tribute to the 80s films of John Hughes, such as like The Breakfast Club and Pretty in Pink. And producer Jamie Campbell said they wanted it to feel more aspirational and less like Grange Hill. Really nicely backs up my theories around it. Because I personally think Netflix was really clever to create this world which wasn't so easily identifiable or linked to a specific place in the UK. This really helps with it not becoming outdated so quickly, which does happen throughout film and media eventually, but it seems to be happening even quicker now with the progression in technology and fashion and trends being so much quicker. I mean, even like the way we speak, I feel like it's changing so much quicker. But it also does allow the show to be more relatable and for the stories that are told within the show to be more relatable to people from a wider audience and from different places. Although it wouldn't be completely impossible, if the show was set in a real town in the UK, it would be harder for those who weren't from that town to be more engrossed in the stories. For example, we currently have a London-centric problem within the media in the UK, and it does really play a role in who is represented on screen and also who is going to be actually engrossed and invested in those stories that are told on TV. And the producer Jamie is right, it does make the town feel aspirational. I mean, it looks visually stunning, it feels culturally progressive, which really fits the theme of the show. show. But yes, while also not completely ignoring inequality and poverty. And one of the most obvious ways they do that is by having the caravan park, which where Maeve and Isaac and a few other characters live. It shows an absolute stark difference to Otis's beautiful Scandinavian house, which is probably, if you're going to think of one place in sex education, that's going to be the first thing that you think of. But you do know that there is also differences in wealth across the characters, and that's not hidden or sort of shoved under the carpet. And I think by doing this, it helps to create a world that feels aspirational but not too ridiculous. And I think it matches the show's themes of liberation, honesty and freedom. Right, this might sound a little odd considering I'm here to defend this season today, but I will be honest and say that by the end of the last season with sex education, I was feeling a little tired, I was feeling a little burnt out, and I was kind of a little bit done with the show. That's not because I disliked it. I mean, I remember enjoying the third season, but I do remember thinking it's getting a little bit tiring and it needs a change up, which is thankfully what we got in season 4. Now, I know this is the thing that has caused a bit of controversy amongst people and that people aren't enjoying, but I'm here to defend this. So at the end of season 3, Mordale High gets shut down, and this is the setting that we've all come to know and love sex education to be set in. And so the characters that remained were moved to a new school, and I generally think that this new school provided enough of a change, enough challenges, enough new characters that it felt refreshing and something new, but without mixing it up a little bit too much before the end of the final season. I think the characters that remained made sure that it felt familiar enough to not feel forced. And I know that one of the big criticisms was that a load of characters just kind of went missing and that like we never saw them, particularly on the bus scene with AIMEE in one of the earlier seasons. Someone was like, half these characters aren't even in it anymore, which is true, but I will be honest, I neither noticed nor cared. That's probably down to me not being emotionally invested in those characters, so that's just lucky for me. But I just really didn't think it made that big of a difference. And that's not because I disliked those characters, I absolutely didn't, but I just thought their time had come to an end on the show. Their stories aren't progressing to this final season, which is okay. It's okay to have your arc come to an end and then to just move on from the show. And move on from the show, a lot of actors have. I think sex education is going to be an absolute springboard for so many rising stars. I mean, we've already seen it. Like, look at Ncuti fucking Gatwa. Do you know what I mean? He's going to be our doctor. Simone Ashley in Bridgerton, who was noticeably one of the ones who was missing, and I think Bridgerton is probably going to be the reason for why she wasn't in this final season. And I know a load of people were complaining about like the load of new characters who they just didn't care about, and I do go on to talk about the new characters later on in the video, but I'm going to defend the choice to have them right here. I know a load of people were saying that like, oh, they brought in these new characters that we like didn't care about and whatever and blah 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 blah. I really didn't feel that. I mean I didn't feel as connected to these new characters. I even go on later on in this video to talk about how I was a little bit wary of them to start with, but I didn't see it as writing in filler characters. The way that I saw the new characters was I thought they were very well developed. I thought they were very well written considering we only had one season to get to know them, and I more saw them as tools which enabled our main characters who we really loved to develop more. So for example, you've got Abby and Eric. I really loved their bond over their religious trauma and their experience with navigating the church as queer people. I really loved that, and it made me really warm to Abby first of all, but it also was a huge part of Eric's development as well, who is like the beating heart of the show. But then you could also say the same about Roman as well. They shared a moment with Cal, and that really helped Cal's development as a person and come to their arc as well. But anyway, going back to the setting change, one thing that I thought was so bloody funny, and it just took me by surprise, was this whole kind of be kind attitude of the new school that they moved to. It was like a massively over PC, like your typical woke, and I'm using that with quotations because when I'm saying that I don't mean that in an offensive way, but you know what I mean, like a woke environment. Really surprised when I saw they were going down this route, not because it felt wrong or out of place, but more just because of the lens that they chose to portray it through and to look at that assessment through. Using our existing characters who we are already attached to, it allowed to see this culture and this environment as alien, and the show actually is making a critique of this culture. bear with me. And it shows that it's not as perfect as it makes out to be. And I saw criticism of this on Twitter, and it was almost like the person, I don't know who made the tweet, but it was almost like they weren't getting the point. They were like, oh, these people are so annoying, this is so toxic positivity, like I don't want to see these people. And it's like, well, that's the point. And like, it's fair enough to not enjoy that on your screen, but like that the show is making a point of analysing this culture and how it is toxically positive, and it ignores any real negative emotion or like any cracks or flaws. And I think you can really see the effects of this most with Aisha's character. She often felt constricted and not able to be herself because this culture is so rigid and boxed and just black and white. And also with Isaac, who makes the most fucking amazing point that the school has all of that money for like a meditation room and all of these amazing things, but yet they can't have a functioning lift. And I don't know if it was deliberate by the writers, but it was kind of reflective of the real world. The disabled characters were the ones who were largely failed in this culture. I don't think it actually benefited anyone long term, but visibly you saw the disabled characters really struggling with it. Because on a surface level, positivity and manifestation are not enough to overcome the structural problem that is ableism. And also it doesn't acknowledge the very deep wounds that are caused to the people who actually experience that in the real world. And as I said before, this isn't me shitting on like PC woke culture, absolutely not, because I think I would be considered to be a part of that quite proudly actually. But there is a very valid critique that the show makes of how does this culture actually function in the real world, where things are a little bit more layered and a little bit more nuanced, compared to online where everything can be more summed up in like an infographic or an Instagram story. But what I think the show does very well is it makes this critique and it looks at this culture without absolutely just shitting on young people, which is something that most of the media be doing. It doesn't belittle the characters and it doesn't make them the enemy. It manages to show them as layered and actually good at heart, but maybe just a little bit misguided. And it provides very well written explanations for their behaviours. They're not young, dumb and completely clueless about the world. In fact, they're actually quite caring and empathetic with what's going on around them. They're just still learning how to navigate all of that while holding space for all of the constant stream of information that they are learning. And also at the same time, because of a lot of them are very young, marginalised people, they're also processing and experiencing a lot of either trauma, turmoil, or just negative emotion. And I think the show got the right balance, but I think it was brave to do, because if it was done wrong, you could have absolutely have just shitted on your core audience, because I would say a lot of the core audience of sex education is going to be politically attuned young people. So if they didn't have got that right, they would have completely have just shat on their core audience and ruined their legacy. So brave choice to make, but I think it paid off. I'm so excited to talk about this. This is my favourite chapter in the whole of this video, so I'm so excited. But I brought Isaac up before and I can't wait any longer, so I want to talk about my favourite thing about this season, which was the disability representation. Which is ironic that this is my favourite part of this season, because it's the part of the show that I've actually always been the most critical of. I remember watching the first show and everyone was raving about how, oh, it's so perfect, the representation is like amazing, it's perfect, it's the most perfect show, everyone needs to watch it, everyone feels seen and represented. And I watched it and I was thinking, is the disability representation in the room with us now? Because I, as a disabled woman and a wheelchair user watching that, felt really invisible. Like I didn't feel like I was in the show at all, because there wasn't a character like me in the show. And then obviously in season 2 we did get Isaac, and I was very happy about that. And then he weirdly became like the villain when he deleted that text from Otis and got in the way of Maeve and Otis. And I had so many thoughts and feelings about that. I hated it. I thought it was a choice to make, because there is already such a dangerous stereotype of disabled people being bitter and jealous, particularly of like non-disabled people. And I really just thought that was such a choice to make when you don't have fair and good disability representation across the board. But then season 3 came and I was very happy with how they turned the storyline around. I personally feel like Isaac had a lot more agency and freedom in season 3. He was the one who chose to call things off with May, and then obviously we had that beautiful scene which was like an intimate scene between Isaac and Maeve, and I really, really loved that as well. But obviously Maeve and Isaac ended things in season 3, and I was really, really worried that when it came to season 4 that he was just going to get forgotten about and not be a part of the show, because he wouldn't have that connection with Maeve anymore, with Maeve being the main character. I was like, if he gets written out, I'll be so upset. So when I saw his little face pop up again, I was like, I'm ready. I'm so ready and I'm happy and relieved. We are introduced to Isaac again when the lift actually breaks down while he is taking it up to class with AIMEE, which by the way had me chuckling just at like how painfully relatable this whole situation was. What I loved about him particularly is how like annoyingly used to it he was, because it's something that happens often obviously with that lift, which comes in later, and then just how clueless AIMEE was, because that's generally how it goes for these types of situations. AIMEE obviously makes a bit of a tit of herself and asks whether he's into art and painting because of the pain of being disabled or something like that, which aside from just being incredibly funny, because they're two incredibly funny actors and they work really well together, it's also a very good representation of how sometimes ableism or things that hurt disabled people aren't always intended to be hurtful or ableist. They can actually be quite well intentioned, but if you're not actually thinking about what you say before you say it, you might end up saying something really offensive because you probably haven't thought about disability before. And so you're saying things without really thinking about them, and you're probably speaking from a very stereotypical or prejudiced place. But anyway, in the next episode, she apologizes, and I thought her apology was really great. It was really honest, really sweet, and they obviously start a friendship. And when I saw this friendship start to bloom, I thought, are they gonna get together? Because that is a pairing that I'd never thought of before, but I thought, oh, I think I like where this is going. And when I tell you, when I realised that they were definitely going to be a pair, or that there was going to be like something there, it made my whole entire year. It made my whole entire year. I think they are such a good pairing. I'm not a person who is like really bothered about like ships and endgame, all that sort of stuff. I'm actually going to make a critique about that later. But I genuinely think they are a pairing which I did not see coming, but I think are so good together. I think she's very caring and understanding and very patient. Isaac is very astute and honest, and then sometimes like a little bit grumpy, but in like a funny way. And I think he just kind of gets her and her weirdness. And together, I think they seem just to be quite light, if you know what I'm saying. I think that's the best way that I can describe it, because I feel like he really got Maeve and Maeve really got him, but it felt quite dark and quite heavy, whereas AIMEE and Isaac feels quite light. It feels like they see each other and they bring out the best parts of each other, which is just lovely. Obviously they both love art and I love watching them work through their art together. Obviously AIMEE also both working through her healing journey, which was a huge moment for her, huge storyline, and I thought it was a very brave and very important storyline to do. I think assault in media isn't often shown the way that it was, so I think it was a very good storyline to do, and I loved the bit, I think it's more towards the end of the season, where she burns the jeans. She has a photo shoot with them and she takes them off and she burns them. I think that was such a beautiful way, I'm not crying, got a little cough. I think that was such a beautiful way to end her story and to really sort of seal her healing journey. I think that was a really beautiful way to end her story. She also communicates that healing with Isaac very well, and I think throughout the show generally, all of the characters generally communicate really well, and the communication issues really seem to be with the older characters, which I think sometimes could be quite reflective. Some of my younger friends are such better communicators than I am, and I think, oh my god, you guys are so astute and like in touch with all of our emotions. But then obviously at the end of the season they share a kiss in the red photo room, and I just thought that was, I'm always gonna love when we get some kind of disability and intimacy representation on screen, but I particularly thought this was really beautiful. They didn't skirt around like the awkwardness of it, and it just felt very natural, and just for me it was very healing to see that as a disabled person, as a wheelchair user. It just felt so right, and I was so bloody happy to see that. But now romance is out the way, it's time for ableism. Yes, I'm talking about the broken lift scene. I love this scene so much. It was actually one of my personal favourite scenes in the whole entire series. Like, I would defend this series just for this scene alone, okay? Just know that. There's a few reasons that I love it. One, it was because the lift was a consistent problem throughout the season for Isaac. It wasn't just like a freak faulty like lift where something's happened. It was something that had been grating on him and wearing him down throughout the whole season. We saw it, and I feel like as a disabled person you encounter this quite a lot, and often the people in charge of it will be like, oh yeah, that's always doing that, and you're like, well, why has it not been fixed properly then? And it's So annoying. And the way it grates on Isaac until he just loses his patience, very understandably. I often have to bite my tongue when I experience issues, especially with like smaller accessibility issues. I mean, the fact that I'm even boxing off for smaller accessibility issues and downplaying it is wrong, I know, but like I think you become so accustomed to choosing your battles and holding your tongue because you either don't want to give it your energy or you don't want to be seen as difficult. But when you have other things in your life that are testing you or require your energy, these instances of ableism become a lot harder to stay quiet on. Like Isaac said, the most important thing he should have been worrying about that day was doing his exams. But for things absolutely outside of his control, it wasn't, which very understandably was the final straw for Isaac. And I think it lends nicely to something that our deaf character Aisha said, I don't know if this was before or after this in the season, where she makes the point about choosing your battles in the cinema with Cal, about the captions on the screen. And like as a disabled person, when I watched that scene, the one about the captions and choosing your battles, I just thought, I felt that so deeply, as I've often found myself in a position where I know something isn't right, whether that's like the way someone has spoke to me or whether a restaurant is using the disabled toilet as a storage cupboard. So many different things. I've really had to learn over the years when to preserve my energy and when to speak up, because if I was, like Aisha said, having to speak up every time I felt something was unjust, I would never rest. And I felt like maybe at the start of being disabled, the start of my journey of being disabled, I was speaking up a lot more for myself, but I really didn't like the impact it was having on me and my personality and my mental health. And then Isaac with the broken leg obviously chooses to fight that battle, rightly so, because he can't get to his exam. And I think George's performance as Isaac is just great throughout the whole show, but I really loved it in this particular scene. I thought he was fantastic. And something that I thought was really quite true to real life is how he almost looked quite shocked when everyone was joining in and protesting with him and making a stand, because I'll be honest, sometimes I am as well. When like if I speak about something on social media that's happened that's unjust and people get behind it and want to support me, you know, and make it known that this is not okay, sometimes it does feel like no one cares. Painfully, that's the truth. Now, obviously, the broken lift was the catalyst for the conversation about ableism and accessibility in the school, but it did also give voice to Aisha to voice her problems and how she has been feeling excluded and how she has been feeling that she has also experienced ableism in the school, which I thought was so amazing to have more than one disabled voice in this scene, to really make a moment of it and to really show that this is just affecting so many more people, but also for the intersectionality aspect of it. Disability representation is lacking like across the media, across the board, but that representation gets even smaller and smaller when you start to look at it by intersection. So when disability is represented, it's normally represented by a straight white person. So disabled people of colour or queer disabled people often aren't represented. So that's why I was so happy when I realised that Aisha was going to be one of the main characters of this season and not just introduced and then become a background character. We got to be introduced to her, we got to grow attached to her, we got to see a journey with her, and we also got to see her explore and be very proud of both her disabled identity and her queer identity and how the two of them also intersect. I really loved her. I thought she was so funny and beautifully empathetic, in a particular scene where at the end where Cal's mum comes in because they're missing and Aisha just like holds her hand and you can tell that she's, you know, a very empathetic person. I thought that was really beautiful. But honestly, talk about disability representation, particularly the representation in the season all bloody day. But as a whole, I was really generally happy with the season. I generally think, I don't know if maybe other people like non-disabled people will notice how great it has been this year, but and maybe not appreciating it is one reason why you think like the season isn't as good. Like that's totally fine, but for me as a disabled person, like this was just so monumental and I really enjoyed it to see. It was really quite healing to see actually, and it really made the season for me. There were other things I loved about the season which we'll get onto, but this really was a cherry on the cake. It wasn't even just a cherry on the cake, it was the filling, it was the flour, and I think it balanced the humour in being disabled as well with also like the hard-hitting topics and the nuance and the layers, and I just thought it was amazing. I would just wish it had been more consistent throughout all 4 seasons, but hey, I'm going to take what I can get and I'm going to say thank you. Okay, now moving on to these two because they are our 2 main characters, I guess. But I will be honest, and I hope that you won't hate me for this, because I have seen so many people on Twitter this morning talking about how much they love MAEVE and OTIS and really shipping MAEVE and OTIS, but I generally find them 2 of the most unstimulating people within the entire show. I'll just say it. I don't know, I like them separately, but I just don't really get behind their relationship. I don't think they're good for each other. I think they have chemistry and they definitely have some sweet moments, but I don't think that dynamic is good or healthy for either of them. They argue more than what I would say is normal, and also like for a show which is about communication and like healthy relationships, and with Otis being they set up the bloody clinic together, but yet it feels like they're not practicing what they preach. I don't know, like maybe I'm wrong, but I just feel like I'm not. Like, you know that one couple that you know that are just always arguing and you think like, are you ever happy? Why are you together? I was happy that the majority of this season at least wasn't them physically together, with Maeve obviously being in America and Otis still being in England. I was happy that they weren't just together and taking over the whole season, the entire show, and I think that probably allowed for the other characters to shine through a lot more, and I do think it was the right decision to have them go their separate ways. I know I've seen so many people on Twitter saying I can't believe they're not endgame and I ship them and all of this stuff, and I don't know whether I'm just sounding really old now, but I think to look at the show through that lens and be annoyed that they didn't end up together when they're clearly not right together, I think it's a very naive way of looking at the whole purpose of the show, because realistically they're teenagers. They learned a lot from each other, and I actually think Maeve's letter to Otis was probably the best part of their relationship. Like, she let him know, you know, the way that he'd impacted her, and then she left that parting gift and she moved on, and I thought that was a very beautiful way of closing their relationship. Now, I do have a little soft spot for Maeve, but I don't know if it's just because my type is literally just emo moody girls. But with Emma Mackey being such a rising star, I imagine she probably wasn't available for as much of the filming in this season, which is what her American storyline was written to allow for. And I actually thought it was really good to see someone who would class as a working class student navigate that environment and navigating not really feeling like her peers and taking knockbacks. And I know that was a dialogue that was actually had within the show with one of the other students at the American school, and I thought that was very good to see, and I thought it was written appropriately. Funeral scene, like, I felt sad, I felt angry, but then I also felt awkward. It was just wondrously and I think it dealt with balancing, which is something the show does very well, balancing the humour of the moment, because there were some awkward funny bits, and then also dealing with her brother, who was like a wild cannon, a loose cannon. That's another thing. I wish Otis, or at least maybe one of the guys, even one of the older ones, maybe like one of the teachers, had like stepped in with the brother a little bit more. Like, I know it's awkward, and then like, would I have done something realistically in real life? I don't know, but like, it just felt so horrible watching her trying to navigate this. Like, it really gave like, you're on your own, kid, you always have been. And I just wish someone had maybe like stepped in and physically actually took over that funeral a bit more for Maeve. But I guess that kind of is a very good representation of Maeve's entire life, trying to manage her family, as has always been down to her. I was so annoyed with Otis this entire season. I thought he was so incredibly selfish. Like, am I the only one who Otis is one of my least favourite characters? I just think he's so selfish, particularly in this season. I don't know if I just never noticed it before, but he's so selfish, especially for someone who spends his entire life listening to other people's problems and wanting to help other people. And I will say, at that, he's very good at. He's very, very good at what he does with the clinic, right? But in his real life, with the people who actually matter and the people who really care about him, he is so selfish. He had no time for the people closest to him. His poor mum, Eric, Ruby. He was so wrapped in that battle with O that like, he just didn't see anything else going on around him. Which also as well, that storyline with O, I know it was like the thread that connected the whole season, but I also did not care that much about it. I really didn't. I realised after I wrote all of my notes up that like, I didn't have a point about O. I didn't write about O at all. So I'm sorry if you really want to talk about O. She wasn't necessarily a bad character. I did not enjoy watching her, but their whole battle was not an important part of the season for me. I'm sorry. But with Otis in particular, I feel like he did correct his wrongs by the end of the season, and maybe I need to give him a bit more grace. He's just a teenage boy, and also he's fictional, so like, it's not that deep. But like, yeah, he did correct his wrongs by the end of the season, but I was just very annoyed with how selfish he was. It's time to talk about the best character. You already guessed it. It's Eric. I truly feel like Eric is the beating heart of this show. He really is, and I can really see why Ncuti Gatwa has gone on to do such amazing things. I can't wait to see him in Doctor Who. He's going to be a superstar. It's a little bit like how, do you remember like Skins really boosted or like made so many careers, like so many huge actors we know now, like Daniel Kaluuya. But firstly, before we get into Eric on his own, I'm going to talk about his dynamic with Otis very quickly, because I don't want to make it all about Otis but I do want to address it very quickly. And it was really sad to see, because I actually really like their friendship. I think they're really sweet. It's really nice just to see, I think, like young boys be friends and be quite wholesome, and also like friendly, like openly friendly with each other. I normally love that, but their relationship was very strained this season. And I actually think Otis is at his best when he is with Eric. Eric does bring out the best in Otis, I think. I think a lot of us make friends when we're younger and things are less complicated, but as we get a bit older and our identities become a little bit more intersectional, we become more consciously aware of who we are and our place in the world, those dynamics become more layered and they need more understanding, more active understanding. When I became disabled, it's definitely something I experienced. I lost quite a few friends. I lost contact with quite a few people because of a myriad of reasons that I won't get into, but there was a lot of the time where it was just that a lot of people were scared. Like Otis said that he was in this season, they were scared to talk about those things, they were scared to address them, they were scared to do something wrong, and then some people just didn't want to make the effort, but some of it was just fear. But back to Eric, I think Eric as an individual character has had great progression throughout this season. I mean, actually just the show as a whole, I've loved watching him process that intersection between his race and his sexuality, and I think this show has done that so phenomenally well, better than a lot of shows that I have seen in recent years. And this season it explored his intersectionality more, as we explored his sexuality and how that intertwines with his religion. And again, this is a very complex topic, because religion historically is very divisive, but especially for queer people it holds a lot of painful history. So I thought it was very brave to tackle this, also with only in a few episodes. You remember the season's only 8 episodes long. I thought it was very brave to tackle this with such a short amount of time, and I thought they did it very well. And I think Eric is a great example of a queer character and a queer person as well, of how coming out isn't just like a one singular event. Like, you know, when you're like, you're coming out and people think you come out once and then like that's it. It's actually not. You'll come out multiple times throughout your life, and you will also maybe like discover more facets of yourself, more things about yourself, and like your identity will begin to either expand or change or grow in some way. And also accepting yourself isn't just, you know, a dead end street, you get there and then that's it, that's the destination. Accepting yourself is also going to be a journey which is going to go alongside your coming out journey. It's something that will continue for the rest of your life, and I feel like they showed that really well with Eric. Now, I would definitely consider myself an atheist. I went to a Catholic secondary school. It wasn't a great experience, and honestly it put me off exploring religion further. And there was particularly problems with my sexuality, as I've been openly queer since I was like 13, and I particularly didn't feel even tolerated, let alone welcomed into the Catholic Church. And I know that is an experience that a lot of queer people go through. So while religion is something that I'm not interested in exploring, I can understand that there are a lot of queer people who do have strong faith, and they do generally really believe in you know, the religion they might have grown up in or one they might have discovered, but there might be problems with their queer identity within that religion. And I can absolutely understand and absolutely respect that Eric, as a Christian, didn't want to let go of his Christian identity, just as he didn't want to let go of his queer identity, and both are just as important because both of them make up Eric. Like, his faith in God shouldn't be compromised because of his queer identity. And there are absolutely churches out there that are welcoming of queer people. And I personally think it's really important that queer religious people are aided and helped to find these spaces where they are welcome, so that they can safely explore their religion and their faith. Because no one should have to compromise on their relationship with God or their queer identity. And the scene where his mum stood up and said, you know, why am I going to cry thinking about this? Oh my God, I'm so traumatized. When he did that scene where he said, you know, I'm proud to be Christian, I'm gay, and his mum stood up and said, I love you, my son. But he took that as his leave to leave the church. Genuinely, I think one of the most powerful scenes throughout the whole show, throughout all 4 seasons. And I was very, very happy with the resolve at the end, where they all came to him and said, we have much to learn. I thought that was a very happy ending. I don't know how realistic that is for a lot of people, but my God, it was nice to see. And I think Eric's ending with him going on to be a pastor is such a fitting ending. I really think that is such a beautiful ending for him. Because, I mean, you even see just through Abby's character and how she was a sort of abandoned or kicked out of the church because of her trans identity and her queerness. There are so many kids out there like Eric and Abby that need that guidance, that need that guidance. And I think someone like Eric would be such a powerful force for that. Eric, the beating heart of the show, so happy with his story and his progression. And I just think Ncuti Gatwa, what a star. Right, I know they've proven controversial, but speaking of new characters, with the school we were introduced to a new gang of characters. They have been very hit and miss with people, and some of them were a little bit more prominent than others. I was very cautious about these characters at first because I didn't trust them, and part of that was largely because of how they treated my queen Ruby, I won't lie. Like, we will not tolerate any Ruby Matthews slander in this household, thank you very much. But as we got to see more of Abby's bond with Eric, as we've literally just discussed, I think that allowed me to see them as more well-developed, well-rounded characters who actually didn't have an agenda, or they weren't evil or villain. You got to see Abby's very real struggle with her faith, and Eric, and how she also helped Eric in a lot of ways, and Eric helped her. And then the session with Roman and Otis also allowed me to see Otis more clear. It really allowed me to see Roman more clearly and warm to him. And something that I like this show has done better over time is how not one person is the villain. You don't have any characters that are just like, they're the baddie, they're the goodie. I mean, that's such a soap opera way of like writing characters. I think it's very outdated now. But what I love about this show is you have characters which were maybe did bad things, and we maybe didn't warm to them at first, but you begin to understand why they are the way that they are, and why they do the things that they do. More realistically, that's how real life is. You don't have good and bad people. You have people who do good and bad things, I think, personally, as a whole. More real, more well-rounded, and not just good or bad. Also, as well, I think the new characters really help to bring in more trans representation. I think the trans representation, I mean, I'm not trans, so I can't speak, but I know that like people have commented on the trans representation within sex education before with Cal, and I have heard from trans people that, you know, they have warmed to the trans representation, but I do think these new characters help to bring it in more vividly and also act as a support for our existing characters. And it was also really good to see a trans relationship as well, because obviously Abby and Roman were both trans, and it was really nice actually to see that relationship, and particularly the sex scene towards the end of the show, because I don't think I'd ever seen a trans relationship sex scene like in that manner, and I thought that was so powerful to see on TV, because like it was so normal, and it didn't look how it's always portrayed to be in the media as something seedy or dirty. It looked loving and enjoyable, and like I imagine that's really powerful for other trans people to see. It's probably for me like how I felt watching the disability representation. I can imagine it meant a lot to other trans people. The fact that it has taken me this long to talk about the queen of the show is actually criminal, so I'm very sorry. But Miss Jean Milburn, we are coming for you right now. Jean's arc in this season wasn't actually what I expected, but I did enjoy it. It was really hard to see this character, which has been such a strong female character and really has actually led a lot of the, I would say, more like morale and like almost like navigated our sense of self throughout the whole show. With her being the therapist, she's really helped to guide us throughout a lot of the turmoil and troubles throughout the show. But so to see her in this season be so different was very hard. Obviously she went through hell and literally nearly died giving birth. She had broken up with her boyfriend. She had little to no support raising this newborn baby, and then was subsequently diagnosed with postpartum depression. I was really struggling to say that. Which is something a lot of women go through. What I thought was so great about it is that she wasn't just crying in bed the entire time and like not getting out of bed, and we didn't really see her. She was semi-functioning, and she was really trying to get back to work and do the radio show and do all of these things and be there for Otis, but you could tell that something just wasn't clicking, something was missing. And I think it's really powerful to actually see a therapist, someone who is usually a guiding light and someone who has led the way throughout the season, seek help and actually say, I need help, I can't do this. I think that was really powerful and great representation. I mean, not only for women who are struggling post having a baby, but also for older women and for older people as well. I think this show gets the older representation really, really right, and not just with Jean as well. So So speaking of older representation, can we please talk about Adam's dad's performance anxiety? I did not think we were going to see this from this man. Go off, Adam's dad, whose name I can't remember, Michael. I know Adam is a fan favourite character. He's the only one in the cast who doesn't go to the new college, isn't he? Who is, I would say, main cast. So very interesting that he has such a prominent role, and he's probably the only one who is like so separate from the rest of them. So the arc with his dad does a really good job at still keeping him very relevant and carrying his character throughout the show. And I think that arc with the dad was really powerful, because I imagine lots of people have been through something similar with their older parents. One of the things I think was so great about it was that they obviously developed and grew together, and that obviously flourished their relationship, but they both individually grew. And I think that really helped, and like at least laid the foundations for them to have a better relationship. And once again, even though Adam's dad has been a lot of the catalyst for some of the problems in the show and a lot of the problems as to why Adam is the way he is, I like that they showed him why he is the way that he is, and they showed him seek help. And then also we need to talk about bisexual King Adam. I really hope things go well with horse riding lady. That would be really great for him. He'd get access to the stables all the time. But that scene where he comes out as bisexual to the new potential love interest off screen we don't see, I think was really great, and I think that was a big moment for him. I think to a lot of people, saying something like that would be quite normal. You wouldn't maybe think something about it, and it should be normalised, but I think to Adam that was really quite hard to do, and so I'm very proud of this fictional man. Jackson and Viv, my two babies. Now, it is very unlikely for me to be rooting so hard for the sports playing straight man, but here we are. Jackson, that's baby boy. That's my baby, that's baby boy. Again, his progression from the first season, if we think about who he was in the first season and the idea that we had of him, so different. He has come worlds and worlds apart. He had quite a shocking storyline in this final season with the cancer scare, which I am glad turned out to be a full scare, because I think if that had been him actually having cancer in the final season, I think that would have been way too much. But it is a nice reminder, please, for everyone to check your balls and your boobs, please, every month. But I liked how this was almost just a catalyst for him to start to act on some of the thoughts that he'd already been having about, you know, who is his dad. And I kind of predicted that maybe his dad was going to be the reason of an affair. As soon as his mum started acting shifty and they were like, we can't tell him, I can't do this now, I thought, that's not a sperm donor. I don't know why, I just had a vibe. And I thought it was a very good storyline, to be honest, because I think naturally, if you were living in that dynamic, you would have those kind of questions. So I did think it was a good storyline, but the only thing is I thought the resolve was quite rushed. I thought like the end, it was literally what resolved in like the last or second to last episode quite quickly, and I just thought maybe that could have been explored a little bit more. Maybe if the resolve was a little bit earlier on in the season and he had a little bit more time to process and ask more questions, and to show that it's an ongoing journey of understanding that part of yourself and where you come from. I don't know, that's just what I think. And then Viv, my studious queen, a queen who appreciates education, I love you so. I was so happy to see Viv get a love interest this year, because I love Viv. We have a lot in common. We like to study, we like to get good grades. Did not like that he turned out to be an abusive arsehole. She deserves so much better. I mean, I think it's an important storyline. Am I annoyed it went to Viv? Yes, but it's not a good storyline for anyone, I guess. And I guess maybe it was so powerful for her because she was so into this guy, and we don't often see her within, I don't know, just not often looking at people in that way. So to see her get a love interest, and then to have to then reckon with, oh, I'm having these feelings, oh, he's behaving funny, and then to have to then dealing with that was very hard for Viv. And I think because of the age of the show, they weren't going to show an abusive relationship in, I don't know, because they showed the abuse that Joanna went through, but maybe because with Viv being still a kid, maybe they weren't going to show the abuse develop further. But I think what was really good was how they almost showed like the early signs, or not even the early signs, but like how it starts in the relationship, what being controlled can look like. Not always just being hit and abused in that way. There are other methods of control, and I feel like they began to show that very well. I think if they were going to show it better, it couldn't have been done in such a short time frame in 8 episodes. I think that's something that needs more care and attention to develop fully. But they love their friendship together, her and Jackson. I think they are just an adorable little pair of friends. Now I do have some criticism. And you might notice that I haven't spoken about someone very important, someone who I have claimed to love throughout this video. That is Ruby Matthews. Yes, I haven't even addressed Ruby Matthews, the Queen. But don't worry, the real ally is coming through right now. Ruby Matthews, a fan favourite, one of my favourites. I hate to say, I was very underwhelmed with her in this season. Not the actress at all. I thought Mimi Keane did a wonderful performance, but I was underwhelmed with how they actually utilised her character. Maybe it was because she had such stunning progression in season 3, and, you know, throughout the other seasons as well, but particularly in season 3, and we saw her really break down her walls. Maybe it felt underwhelming after that, but I just felt, compared to everyone else in the season, I feel like everyone else had such bigger developments this season than she did. And yes, she did grow. Obviously, she did that whole speech where she was like, "You're making me think that, like, being kind isn't all bullshit," and all of that stuff. But I just feel like it was a lot more surface level and not very developed compared to some of the other characters. I don't know, I just felt, and I think because Ruby is such a great character and we love her so much, it just felt a bit underwhelming. And I was annoyed that most of the time that I wanted to see my Queen, I had to see her putting up with Otis's bullshit. I love having her on screen. She's such a funny character. She's played so well. She always serves out a look. But I hate that every time I see her, it's normally her aiding Otis or helping Otis in some way. She gave so much labour to Otis this season. She really did. And I just wish that she'd had a little bit more of a storyline that wasn't so connected to him. Or obviously she had the storyline with Ove, but it was with Ove, but then because of Ove's rival with Otis, that was innately connected to Otis still. I think maybe even something just at the end about maybe like her going into PR or knowing what she's going to do next, or, you know, hearing just a little bit more about her and what does she want and what is she going to do now. I think even that just would have been something. But those were my thoughts on Sex Education Season 4, the climax. As a whole, I thought it was a very good season. I love the way they wrapped it up, personally. I know it's very divisive. I know lots of people aren't liking the way they finished it, but I thought the majority of the characters had a very satisfying end. And I liked the way they brought in new characters who didn't just feel like plot points. They did help to develop and bring our loved main characters' storylines to a close, but they also felt well written, and I thought the show remained funny while also doing what it does best, which is hitting the hard-hitting topics. But the show, I'm finding out, is very divisive, so I would love to know what you guys thought. Did you enjoy it? Did you not? Is there any characters that you would love to have seen in the 4th season who weren't in the 4th season? Was there anyone who you thought had a good ending? Anyone you thought had a bad ending? Do you think that we'll get a reunion in any type of way? I personally don't think so. But yeah, let me know. If you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. I've realised that I've probably been talking for so long. This video is probably going to be so long, but I really hope you enjoyed my rambling. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive, and I will see you in the next video.